Good evening, dear colleagues, students, friends, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really delighted that this is indeed the fourth time that I can welcome you to an Else Lasker-Schüler lecture. I had the idea to do that when I passed Else Lasker-Schüler's grave here on the Mount of Olives. My parents are both buried a few meters away. And once when I passed by her gravestone, I thought that I would like to do this. And I'm delighted that I found partners immediately, especially here at the Leo Baeck Institute, but also with the German department at the Hebrew University and the Franz Rosenzweig Center of the Hebrew University. And also my Institute of Jewish Studies, where it was welcomed by the board with great pleasure. It is the first time after 2 years where we had to hold this virtually. And one of the advantages was that we could indeed expand the visibility of this event. And now I heard, Irene, you told me how many are watching with us. So around 50 people are following this as well, which is one of the advantages, but I must say that it is a very great pleasure to be here and to see you all in person. So before I introduce the speakers, I do want to thank the people personally. I want to thank Christoph Schmidt, who was one of those partners who agreed to join from the beginning with the German department. I want to thank the current chair of the German department, Professor Amir Engel, who is now a full contributor to the event. I want to thank Benjamin Pollack, who is here also. So Professor Pollack, who is now the chair of the Rosenzweig Center. There are so many things going on in this city at this point that it is really remarkable, and I'm grateful that you made it to come here. My thanks to Galili Shachar, to Yael Ben-Avi, and to Sharon Livney here. And Irene, thanks for this long-standing cooperation and other cooperations that we are having. Actually, there will be a conference next week on Tuesday, next Tuesday, that we organize together. So, Irene, thanks a lot. I also want to welcome students who are here from my doctorate students, as well as students who I'm teaching here at the Hebrew University, notably Else Lasker-Schüler. I'm actually teaching her in one context or the other every year. Now, finally, my very special thanks go to Professor Itar Shedletsky and to Guy Dolev, who immediately and graciously accepted our invitation to respond to our main speaker of tonight, Liora Bing Heidecker. I'm truly looking forward to your talks. Liora, it is particularly significant for me personally that you are speaking here tonight. I met you at a memorable event that you organized in a cafe on Jaffa Street a few years ago. It was a magical moment, an unforgettable, true Jerusalem moment with a fantastic mime, music, and an atmosphere in which the Oriental and the German, various arts and genres, scholarly and artistic, bohème and high art mixed in ways that would have made Lasker-Schüler's heart dance. So speaking of dance, our speaker of tonight will approach Lasker-Schüler from a highly unusual angle, or rather bringing together perspectives that I rarely joined in discussions of Lasker-Schüler's work: dance, literature, philosophy, and indirectly the politics of these conjunctions when you put them all together. It is interesting that politics which is an aspect of Lasker-Schüler that was for a very long time bracketed out. You know, she was considered as this dreamer, as this eccentric bohemian who lived more in another world than in the here and now. And it is interesting that since we are discussing Lasker-Schüler here in all, so this is the 4th lecture, and I had the privilege to have a little glance at what Liora will be speaking about. There too, there is a certain political angle, and this was the case with the first. This was the case with the first Lasker-Schüler lecture, where the speaker quite unexpectedly brought together Lasker-Schüler with Carl Schmitt of all people. So as a contrast, obviously, but and then there was a lecture about different Hebrew translations of Lasker-Schüler, where the point was how she's in the one case universalized, and in the other case, I don't know what the verb is for Zionistified, no, but something like that. But it was highly interesting to see how, on the basis of translations, one could show that. And last year, there was a lecture by Alfred Bodenheimer on a text that was barely known on anti-Semitism, and that clearly brought in a political dimension. So I just, when I thought of this evening and I thought of my welcome words, I thought that it is interesting that when somebody like Lasker-Schüler come, you know, in Germany, she has not been dealt with in this way at all. She was rather treated as one of the token Jews that one can re-celebrate in a, I would say, risk-free way. But it is interesting that when she comes here to Israel, that it is almost inevitable, and I think it is quite a privilege to hear these approaches. And Liora, I'm really, really grateful that you accepted this. And I'm looking forward to hearing your lecture. I wish you all a wonderful evening. And I will then introduce, before the respondents, I will introduce them separately. Okay, I do it again.
Thank you so much, Vivian. I'm really excited to be here tonight and to have been invited to give this lecture to you. I think I should confess it's my first lecture, full-time lecture in English, so I will be reading, but forgive me for that. And thank you very much, Dr. Aubin David, and all the collaborators in this fantastic place, and the Hebrew University and the Minerva Institute and all the other collaborators. And of course, thank you to my respondents, who I'm very much looking forward to listen to. Well, do I have to introduce Else Lasker-Schüler in this place? I believe this is a rhetorical question. At once a prose writer, a playwright, a poet, a painter, and a performer in every sense of these callings, her abundant creative imagination, in which her life and art were totally immersed, cannot be narrowed down to any single track. Tonight, I will focus on the Knights of Tino of Baghdad and the Prince of Thebes, two anthologies of short tales that were written between 1907 and 1914, a time of great upheaval in Else Lasker-Schüler's personal life, a time in which she bravely liberated herself from behavioral conventions dictating the demeanor of Jewish women in Wilhelmine, Germany. As Vivian Liska rightly remarked, the adventures of Tino may be regarded as a veiled documentation of a triple emancipation: social, emotional, and artistic. Tino and Yussuf could both be regarded as alter egos, monikers, by which Lasker-Schüler would sign her letters to the end of her life. In recent years, their anthologies provided scholars with a rich corpus of research in diverse fields. However, tonight, I would like to read The Knights and the Prince from a choreographic angle. I hope to show how the dance trope assisted Lasker-Schüler's triple aim, namely her emotional self-emancipatory pursuit, her social feminist quest, and her artistic resolution to become a poet and writer all at once. The fact that the word dance appears no less than 27 times in The Knights and 19 times in The Prince leaves no doubt as to its major significance in these texts. What made this metaphor so potent for Else Lasker-Schüler? What did dance mean to someone who didn't dance? What was feminism to someone opposed to any isms, even before the term was coined? And how are the two, the feminism and the dance, interlinked in her personal choreo-fantasy, biographical choreo-fantasy? Dance as a metaphor for freedom is no news. But I believe that Lasker-Schüler's dance metaphor is firmly grounded in the unique moment in Weimar history in which dance became a model for modernist writers seeking new, authentic ways of writing, and at the same time, a source of inspiration for suffragists propagating radical changes in women's social, political status and in the image of women at large. Thus, Louis Fuller's dance evoked the thought of a new kind of poetry for the French writer Stéphane Mallarmé, just as Salomé's scandalously popular Dance of the Seven Veils exemplified the emancipated modern woman for audiences all over the continent. For German Jewry, these developments which somehow echoed their own emancipatory struggle, were finally backed up by a broad movement of life reform, Lebensreform, that coincided with Lasker-Schüler's midlife crisis. Already in 1902, in Mein Tanzlied, in her book Styx, Else Lasker-Schüler described her existential experience of tumult and tearing apart of the psyche in terms of a perpetual dance. Turn of the century audiences throughout Europe were swept with excitement at the sight of Isadora Duncan's recitals, offering a living example of a woman who freely expressed her innermost feelings through dance. In 1907, the same year of the Knights, Robert Walser in The Tanners masterfully described the young woman performing a dance recital, apparently in the wake of Duncan's freestyle, offering an insight into the powerful impact of modern dance on contemporary audiences. It was as though dance itself had been emancipated from restrictive old classical conventions And so, all of a sudden, the up to now marginalized profession of a dancer became highly esteemed, teaming up with the up to now marginalized status of being a woman. I'm saying that dance actually illuminated modernism from its corporeal perspective as an enormous desiring machine, scrambling together women, bodies, poetry, and literature in an exciting, non-linear, immanent network of becomings. I will use these concepts, coined much later by the philosopher Gilles Deleuze and his partner Félix Guattari, as theoretical scaffolding for my thesis. It would be impossible to properly introduce Deleuze and Guattari's groundbreaking phenomenology within our time limit. Suffice it for our purpose to say that their empiricist vitalist theory resists vertical stratification and that it spreads across a horizontal axis to evade authoritarian hegemonies. By following lines of flight away from majoritarian conventions, minority groups adopt strategies of nomadism and enter into accidental encounters at any point. This forever growing web of assemblages, stimulating heterogeneity and multiplicity, transform the subject, whose mutations and metamorphoses are conceived of by Deleuze and Guattari as becomings. The concept of becoming is central to our quest, since to Lasker-Schüler, as for Deleuze and Guattari, to write is to become. Becoming a dancer sparks off Else Lasker-Schüler's writing. Right from the opening tale, I dance in the mosque. Tino's dance momentum engulfs the entire universe. It embraces the four elements as well as time immemorial, ancient as an Egyptian mummy, yet extending far into the future, endowed with the power of prophecy. Prophecy in Jewish scriptures is not just an issue of foretelling the future, but rather a matter of telling the truth. Earthly, ethereal, and eternal, she finds herself passionately deeper and deeper in trance, which brings the truth out of her. Let us dwell on the word trance with a CE, or its homonym trance with an S at the end, which I will use interchangeably because it invokes both transitory and transcendent connotations. Trance is to be understood as an ecstatic event, one that derives from the Greek term ekstasis, which literally means standing outside of oneself. In other words, it denotes a first-hand experience of exterritorialization, of becoming nomad. Modern dance literally plunged into trance, believing to express an inner truth through the Dionysian powers of ecstasy. When in the nights, Tino's dance slips deeper and deeper into trance, one is reminded of Buber's ecstatic confessions, revealing the desire to add an ancient metaphysical dimension to modern life, but at the same time, indulging in an almost anarchist state of loss of self-control, challenging any form of socio-political order. In the poem which concludes the nights, the song of my life, Else Lasker-Schüler provides us with, in a nutshell, with a linguistic perspective of such trans connotations. She writes, siehe in mein verwandertes Gesicht, tiefer beugen sich die Sterne. Look at my transformed face, the stars bend lower. Verwandert is a verbal construct which is impossible to translate into English because it fluctuates between three different semantic fields. Verwandt, namely in blood relationship, wandern, to wander, and verwandeln, to transform. Thus, it eludes a stable lexical meaning. Nonetheless, this conundrum is sensed by the narrator as a lived experience, which she urges her addressee to notice. Siehe in mein verwandertes Gesicht. It is exactly this fluctuating threefold meaning that assumes a form of transcendental dance, which is being performed throughout the text. In Deleuze's words, the work of art, and I quote, the work of art leaves the domain of representation in order to become experience, transcendental empiricism. Lasker-Schüler commences her feminist choreo-fantasy by challenging the strongest pillar of patriarchal hegemony, God himself. All along the knights and the prince, Tino's dancing is associated with holiness, with religious surroundings such as Allah's mosque or Jehovah's temple. A woman dancing in the holy shrine, God forbid. Such dancing would traditionally be regarded as desecration or even blasphemy. However, Lasker-Schüler suggests not only a personal style of liturgy, but an innovative religious conception that opens up a new way of knowing God through dance. In the intimate, ancient Hebrew sense of the word. Long before Rita Gross's groundbreaking 1972 article, Female God Language in a Jewish Context, Lasker-Schüler offers a female form of religiosity that ranges beyond any specifically Jewish, Muslim, or Christian theological discourse. God, she said, and I quote, created in his original image. And I ask myself why one should despise this original image, the carnal one, the shell of the soul. End of quote. Lasker-Schüler did not reject religiosity, but opposed its oppressive regime. After all, it was the greedy fakir of Thebes who sacrificed Tino's sisters for the sake of his pious work and caused them to bleed for 40 days. And it was the high priest, Jehovah's faithful servant, as she calls him, who impeded the amok runner's devotion to Jehovah and banned his love affair with his daughter. So to pursue her God, Lasker-Schüler had to rescue him from captivity in the strongholds of male religious clergy. Instead of the Oedipal father as God or God as father relationship, she strips him of his omnipotence and lends him a goddess child or goddess woman notion. Thus, she actually minoritizes God himself and offers him a line of flight. It is important to stress that by challenging traditional tenets, Lasker-Schüler, like Martin Buber, actually tries to bring God back into the stream of modern life, from which he, like herself, was in danger of being expelled. In this creative, subversive, and may I say, prophetic manner, she anticipated the invention of feminist theology long before such a term would be coined. In line with feminist theology's aim to reinstate a religious environment of non-hierarchical harmony. Lasker-Schüler constructs a mythopoetic heavenly bridge that connects the rooftops of the sheikh, the writer's great-grandfather, and the Sultan, his Jewish best friend. The trans-religious overpass establishes a virtual dialogical route between Judaism and Islam, emphasizing an actual possibility of trans with a CE, namely of stepping out of one's set ways, of transgressing one's standpoints in order to change positions and to create new encounters and alternating choreographic outlines. Feminist theology also aims to alter the imagery and language about God in a way that is inclusive of women by resisting the inherent male personification embedded in liturgical language. Lasker-Schüler's completely innovative personal appellation of God, which transcribes the name of God with an idiosyncratic twist, can be seen as a precursor for this mission. The biblical title Adonai Tzevaot, formally translated to German as Herr Tzebaot, and connoting a strong domineering Lord, is inverted by Lasker-Schüler to invoke the image of a youth surrounded by a gang of youngsters, Tzebaot Knaben, Tzebaot lads, who make up Prince Yussuf's entourage. By dropping the Herr, Lord, Lasker-Schüler's God conjures up an image of a young, accessible lover situated down on earth. In Chandragupta, for example, Shlome, the high priest's daughter, lets her hair play like Eve in front of the creator and begins to coax him. The text goes on to describe how Shlome's, and I quote, prayers become love caresses. In one of Lasker-Schüler's famous poems, Tzebaot, she elaborates upon this erotic rapport. God, I love you in your rose dress when you come out of your gardens, Tzebaot, etc. Divine love, common to all Abrahamic religions, is immanent to Judaism and the essence of the Shema, the most important part of Jewish liturgy. But rather than leaving it as an abstract declaration, Lasker-Schüler interprets it as a performative command. By addressing God in playful terms of endearment, such as the diminutive Göttlingchen, her objective is to bring God down to earth and to allow for an intimate rapport, reminiscent of her highly eroticized relationship with her dancing partner, Min, meaning sex in Hebrew. Nonetheless, we are constantly aware of the way Lasker-Schüler effeminates Tzebaot by lending him tenderness, sweet fragrance, rose dresses, beauty, and poetic qualities. Lasker-Schüler's liturgical language is thus remolded, entranced, and danced to produce events of becoming, lines of flight, and points of encounter for a minoritized God and a minoritized devotee. The transformative quality of dance is most intriguingly revealed in the tale about Chandragupta, or its alternative name, the Amok Runner. An impossible love story that finally overcomes the rift between restrictive religious laws and spontaneous worship by setting trance, both with an S and with a CE, and dance in a fantastic whirl, culminating in gender transfiguration. Chandragupta, an offspring of an ancestral mixed marriage between the son of a savage tribe of heathens and the daughter of an ancient Jewish king, mysteriously drops down from heaven. The Jews don't know what to make of the feathered, winged stranger who landed at their city gates out of the blue. Is he Satan or a messenger from God? Allowing for the benefit of doubt, the high priest lets him stay in his house, but to his great dismay, the heathen and his only daughter, Shlomi, fall in love. Now Chandragupta's attempts to aestheticize Jehovah's worship in line with his tribal customs, but his efforts are regarded by the high priest as desecration of the temple. The enraged Chandragupta runs amok and ends up bringing disaster and bloodshed to the city of Jericho, which, while Shlomi, in a provocative, erotic gesture, joins her lover by sacrificing her body to God as a token of love. The sacrifice of Shlomi restores peace and harmony to the streets of Jericho, yet the dramatic finale of the tale leaves the reader perplexed. The transition of the king's grandson reaches an intriguing turning point when the female has been completely absorbed by the male body. But then, all of a sudden, the man becomes woman, not just by imitating or assuming a female form, but in line with Deleuze and Guattari's conception, by becoming pregnant and producing within himself a molecular woman. Thus, Chandragupta's surrealistic metamorphosis abolishes gender polarization. It circumverts the difference between the sexes down to its biological basis and puts in question the very structure of sex opposition. Moreover, the closure in the ladies' section of the synagogue makes the religious establishment accept gender fluidity and admit the rebirth of an independent human subject, not determined by the binary sex matrix. Perhaps the most poetic and bizarre tales in the Nights describe Tino's love affair with a beautiful Greek youth named Apollides, whom she follows out of town because he spoke so beautifully in praise of love. One is tempted to believe that Apollides alludes to Apollo, the beautiful Greek god of music, dance, and poetry, who became a greatly inspirational figure in early modernism, as a renewed symbol of enlightenment. However, we should juxtapose Lasker-Schüler's infatuation with Apollides against the Apollonian fascination of her contemporaries, since Apollides is, in fact, Apollo's antipode. The phonetic similarity between the two names is deceptive. Apollides, as I've found in a French legal old dictionary, is a word deriving from Greek, literally meaning banished from the polis, townless, expatriated, a person with no rights or identity, and thus forever deprived of civil protection. Apollides. Ironically, the destiny of an eternal vagabond is that of the wandering Jew, which in Lasker-Schüler's case will eventually converge with her own expatriated fate. So who is Lasker-Schüler's Apollides? Is he the personification of a total stranger or the reflection of her own self-estrangement? It is eerie to think that the dancer's arm lifted in prophecy in I'm dancing in the mosque was a hint at Tino's exile to the rotten city and a prefiguration of Lasker-Schüler's banishment from Germany by the Nazi regime. In the rotten city, Tino and Apolides encounter girls who call themselves the queen names of their mummies and dance the same tireless dance in dusty shawls. Dance here, reminiscent of the opening scene in the mosque, is completely opposed to an Apollonian hymn. It has the broken, melancholy vibe of mourning. Thus, like Jehovah, also the omnipotent figure of Apollo is subverted. He is a lover, yes, yet a powerless outcast, while dance once again turns into a misgeschick, a misfortune, a metonym for the unending meanderings of the diaspora. The story about the great mogul of Philippopolis is about a crisis of language caused by a sting of an insect in the tongue of the great mogul, which deprives him of speech and incapacitates him of ruling the state. Tino becomes his spokeswoman and, cunningly taking advantage of the situation, succeeds in passing some highly inventive reforms, such as duty-free import of fragrant spices, or the construction of luxurious homes for shaggy stray dogs. The great mogul of Philippopolis is, in fact, about the impotence of the old regime, suggesting the possibility of a completely different feminine grammar, a feminist linguistic turn, so to speak, informed by creative imagination that overrules patriarchal semantic conventions. While the modernist dance revolution was closely linked with the image and status of women, it was also deeply interlaced with the concurrent Sprachkrise, or crise de verre, as it was called in France. Distrust of the representational function of language led back to natural body language, and dance became an inspiration for the redemption of literature. The French poet Stéphane Mallarmé spoke of écriture corporelle, body writing, and Paul Valéry heralded dance as pure poetry. Even Buber proclaimed that the gesture of man liberates itself, through dance. In the great mogul of Philippopolis, Lasker-Schüler offers the ruler a dance language of her own with no teleological aim, an unbitten tongue that is allowed to dance unrestricted by patriarchal sovereignty. Lasker-Schüler's tales are abundant with examples of her inventive use of German language. Here, dance is not just a metaphor, but a linguistic device, a strategy by which language as such is emancipated. For instance, her poem for Mariam of Nazareth in the Nights is an allegedly Syrian poem in alliterative gibberish next to its supposedly German translation. I mean, you have to see it to believe it, but believe me, it's so. There is also her unique naming tactics, including the bizarre choice of the biblical female name Abigail. Another one of her epithets, which in a feminist gesture, she bestows upon an imaginary Jewish royal dynasty. Lasker-Schüler did not speak Hebrew or Arabic, although she famously maintained that her works were written in Hebrew. One can't help thinking of Proust's saying, quoted by Deleuze, and I quote, "Writers invent a new language within language, a foreign language, as it were, end of quote. Tino's adventures in Philippopolis had a sad ending. The world was not yet ready for her feminist linguistic turn. Banished from court and stripped of her magnificent garments, Tino resumes her nomadic trail, followed only by a white donkey, ironically symbolizing messianic times. Olga Tokarczuk, in a recent article, Eccentricity as Feminism, states that womanhood, when banished to the cellar, as she says, loses its patriarchal diction, its refined essayistic flights and virtuoso sentences, as she said, and can only murmur. It isn't surprising that Tokarczuk should mention menstruation, unhealthy love for animals, sentimentality, feeding stray cats, mumbo jumbo, etc., as typically wild, laughable, eccentric, untamed traits of women's writing. And aren't all of these qualifications true of Lasker-Schüler? Yes, the wild, untamed murmur concludes The Prince of Thebes as dance, music, and language disintegrate and collapse into each other. The melancholy, cosmic, apocalyptic dance image in the closing paragraph blends with the farcical image of the two Negroes, subverting the melancholy dance by lending it a comic, down-to-earth aspect. Like never before, celestial and deafening tunes merge beyond any physical boundaries, echoing Lasker-Schüler's search for a new feminine language that is allowed to wander aimlessly beyond any sense of meaning. Abba Rabbi, Abba Rabbi, Abba Rabbi, Yachayarehu. So it goes. Lasker-Schüler lures language out of its semantic habitat into a nomadic odyssey of becoming. Neither German or Hebrew or Arabic, it becomes an event of sound, rhythm, color. It becomes dance. Abba Rabbi, whoo, goes the stutter or stammer that Deleuze attributes to great writers, along with the murmur of womanhood, as Tokarczuk puts it, reverberating Lasker-Schüler's lifelong choreo-fantasy, her brave, unique, feminist ontology of becoming. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
This was simply wonderful and beautiful, beautifully presented. And I realized in the middle while you were talking that I didn't introduce you. But then I thought, well, maybe this is better as a footnote because you introduced yourself in a way that was probably much more appropriate for a Lasker-Schüler lecture than if what I'm going to do now, which is just read out your CV, but I will do it for the form. Liora Bing Heidecker is a ballet educator and a dance scholar, as well as a poet, and we have noticed that, and a translator. A graduate of the Royal Academy of Dancing, London, and the University of Durham. She was head of the Haifa Ballet School, the dance department of the Arts and Crafts High School in Haifa, and taught at the Bat Dor Dance School, in the Kibbutz Dance Company, and in other leading dance schools in Israel. Liora Bing Heidecker was a member of various professional dance boards and chaired numerous national committees in the field. She's currently a member of the Israeli Society for Dance Research, the International Exposure Advisory Committee for the Suzanne Delal Center in Tel Aviv, and a board member of the Agnon House Literary Museum in Jerusalem. She translated texts by Jean-Marie Bertolt Brecht, Walter Benjamin, Alfred Döblin, Paul Valéry, Stéphane Mallarmé, Théophile Gautier, and many others. She won the Israeli Ministry of Culture Award for Poetry in 2001 and the Deutsch-Hebräischen Übersetzungspreis in 2020 for her translation of Else Lasker-Schüler's early prose. She publishes articles in various international dance research venues, and her latest publication is The God Seeker, Akim Volinsky and Ballet as a Jewish Quest in the Oxford Handbook of Jewishness and Dance. Liora, you are, for us here, above all this, such an unusual mixture of a scholar, of a poet, of a translator, and even a kind of singer, because you gave us the experience of a performance in ways we will not forget. So thank you so much. I will now introduce, anyone wants to go first? Okay, I will now introduce the first respondent. So we have a wonderful couple in our cast for tonight. The first, Guy Dolev, who is a creator of dance and theater.
That's fine.
Guy.
I will go French
from the
today.
French, yeah. Okay, but I agree with, in English it sounds a bit mannered because Guy Dolev is a creator of dance and theater, currently studying for a master's degree at the program for cultural studies at the Hebrew University. His academic research, as well as his choreographic practice, are a conceptual attempt to situate dance aesthetics and its history in relation to practices of medicine and manifestations of erotics. And I had the great pleasure to meet Guy. He contacted me about his master thesis, and I'm delighted to be one of its supervisors. It is quite astonishing what he's doing there in very, very unusual ways. So already the combination of medicine, erotics, and dance is surprising, and I'm learning so much from him. Guy, please.
Well, thank you, Vivian, for this introduction and for inviting me. And thank you, Liora, for these insightful and far-reaching interpretations, as well as for giving Else Lasker-Schüler's prose new Hebrew words, words that, as you said, have been there all the time as lingual fantasy on Oriental speech, and now have come into a realization just a few years ago as a beautifully articulate translation, lucid, inventive, and intricate altogether. So the choreographic, the choreo-phantasmatic, the choreo-hallucinatory, or how to sublate the scripture of dance. Liora Bing Heidecker's bright neologism, choreo-fantasy, is a recent one in a long line of lexical inventions in which choreo serves as a prefix to denote a relation to the art of dance. The first one to use choreo in that manner was Raoul Auger Feuillet, who coined choreography in 1701. Looking both into Feuillet's intensely connotated invention and into Jacques Rancière's interpretation of the chorus movement in Plato's Laws, I wish to make further suggestions as to how could the choreo-phantasmatic surpass the choreographic in relation to the prose of Else Lasker-Schüler. So choreo-fantasy couples together Lasker-Schüler's oriental, lingual, and emotional hallucination-like imagery with a thought of movement that is fundamentally sensorial. But this corporeal movement has to be considered also as the movement of faculties of perception out of their own limits. That is, movement of transgressing the limits of perception, skin barriers, opacity of surfaces, towards an erotic intersubjectivity of a chorus that shares a common sense of its own corporeality as a cohort. When French theoretician Jacques Rancière, in his book The Distribution of the Sensible, characterized the basic formations of the ancient Greek regime of art, that is, how art was thought of, taxonomically divided, and taught as ways of participation in the polis, he drew on Plato's conception of the written text in Phaedrus, the theatrical simulacra in the Republic, and the movement of the chorus in the Laws. Following Plato, Rancière negates the choreographic to writing and theater, which are, and I quote, two main models, two major forms of existence and of sensible effectivity of language, writing and theater, which are also structure-giving forms for the regime of arts in general, end of quote. In contrast to the page and the stage, the chorus, in Rancière's words, are the form of the community that sings and dances its own proper unity. This is a participatory form of art from which no representation is infirmed aesthetically, politically, or ontologically. There is no idea to be presented, and in that sense, the choreographic does not essentially require an audience the way that theatrical simulacra do. As a paradigm of moving sound and sounding movement, a possibility of citizenship and a form of life that is primarily experiential, the choreographic for Rancière demands the practice of perception that is nothing but communal reflection. Returning, however, to the coinage of choreography in the beginning of the 18th century, we reveal an entirely different meaning. Chosen in the year of 1700 for the title of Fourier's Manual of Dance Notation, choreography meant something quite different than what we conceive of today as choreography, namely the formation of dance, be it precisely timed movement routine or a freer score for improvisation. In chorégraphie ou l'art de décrire la danse, choreography or the art of depicting dance, choreography simply means the inscription of conventional gestures as signs on the page for further reading and performative reconstruction. Choreography is then, from its inception, a site of bodily gestures and graphic gestures, command and obedience, encoding and interpretation, writing and reading. So when Rancière points at the choreographic as the form of art that sublates writing and staging with being moving, he accidentally uses the words that at least originally means a form of writing theatrical simulacra in a way that generates yet another simulacrum, a form in which the combination of writing and staging produces no sublation. Nevertheless, Liora's Choreo-Fantasy denotes a writing of dance that does sublate written staging or staged writing, and in this sense, it might be closer to the imagined dance of the utopic formation of the small-scale political assembly that is the chorus. Else Lasker-Schüler's fragments of Tino and Apollodis show yet another kind of dance that resists signifying. Lasker-Schüler's fantasies of movement are flows of energy detailed with textures that are carried by innumerable metaphors. These choreo-fantasies, choreo-hallucinations, choreo-deliriums sweep Tino and her lover Apollodis into a cluster of fabrics, tissues, liquids, and airs through which temperatures diffuse and humid architectures are built and collapse. These events of motion remain purely sensational. If they are dances, they are the dances of membranes, dances of nerve bubbling and molecular explosions. And unlike dances that are object for spectatorship and choreographic texts that are object for reading and interpretation, these choreo-fantasies resist ocular perception, resist passing through a faculty of sight. Tino and Apollodis are in a palace made of glass. The walls are transparent as well as their bodies. Even their speech becomes lucid, and their lips, vehicle of both speech and kisses, are colored with the color of secret. What matter could generate the pigment of secret? And what would happen should a secret be seen and kissed by transparent bodies? As Else Lasker-Schüler embeds within these playful erotics the ultimate desire of seeing, which is the desire to see through the clothes, see through the skin, see through a lover's expression, see through the paper what is written on its backside. However, this fantasy collapses precisely because of the total realization of this fantasy of transparency. When one desires to see through some surface, it is required that at some point, the vectors of sight will stop at an opaque surface. But in a world where everything is transparent, there are optimal conditions for seeing, as nothing blocks the view, yet nothing can be seen because nothing blocks the view. And following this, nothing can be perceived and grasped, nothing can occur, or at least be inscribed as an event that has occurred. Nothing can occur since these bodies without organs, inside a world without surfaces, are glass prisms through which unrecordable sensations refract like rays of light. A million refracted rays, and yet not one event. Another aspect of this transparency is the standstill of time. For us, living outside of the Lasker-Schüler prose and poetry, or rather beside it, temporality is not transparent. The future cannot be seen behind innumerable semi-opaque layers of minutes. However, Lasker-Schüler's insistence on transparency makes no future arrive in a chain of events. Through transparency, Lasker-Schüler maintains an eternal present, suffocatingly dwelling on an almost. The hand of Tino and Apollodis almost touch, and their lips almost kiss. They never leave marks that would tell of a happening or compose an event. Here we witness how choreo-fantasy exceeds choreography, since it cannot leave a mark. It cannot be signified, since it cannot be realized as a kiss or a touch. This dance of limbs, lips, and inner organs resists the choreographic, namely the aspiration of inscribing it either on paper or on human flesh, thus forming a movement that piously postpones the occurrence of an event. Read from a Platonic point of view, the etymology of Apollodis that Liora just shared with us resonated already in the beginning of my response. If we are for an art that is non-representational, if we are for an art that is sensorially experiential, then Apollodis, the writer, the performer, is among the artists whom Plato ordered to banish from the polis with their dangerously effective simulacra. Tino's love affair with Apollodis is the narrative of the metaphorical return to the polis, to a realm governed by the hyperrealization of the desire to see through. This is a narrative of redemption towards the choreo-phantasmatic, towards becoming chorus with desire, in an eternal present of nerval almosts.
It was wonderful that you reminded us that as matter, we are obstacles. It is a memorable reminder. Now to our last speaker and second respondent, Ita Szydlecki. She was until 2003 professor of German and German-Jewish literature at the German department and the Franz Rosenzweig Research Center at the Hebrew University, and one of the pillars of the whole German endeavor at the Hebrew University. Her publications on German-Jewish literature of the 19th and 20th century. She was the editor of Gershom Scholem's Letters, a selection on behalf of the Leo Baeck Institute in 4 volumes. The co-editor on behalf of the Rosenzweig Center in cooperation with German and Swiss universities and archives of the critical edition of Else Lasker-Schüler's works and letters in 11 volumes. This gives you only a very dry skeleton of Ita Szydlecki's work and of her Wirken in this country on behalf of such important figures in the German-Jewish world, and Else Lasker-Schüler in particular. Ita, I'm delighted to welcome you here.
May I sit here?
Of course, of course.
Oh, thank you very much. What we call in Hebrew, Gilui Naot. We had contact already, Liora and I, while she was translating the early prose works she mentioned in her talk. And it was a wonderful collaboration, me being a native German speaker, and she, as she told me, never learned German in a course. So we had a wonderful dialogue for quite a long
Ita, vielleicht
time.
setzt du dich auf diesen Stuhl, weil dann geht das Mikrofon.
Okay, okay, dann muss ich das hierher nehmen. Okay. And first of all, I was happy because one of my endeavors where I paid attention as on the reception of Else Lasker-Schüler in Germany, but everywhere, was mainly, if at all, her poetry, and her prose was what you call a stepchild in the research and also in the translation of Lasker-Schüler. If you only think of the Hebrew translations, Amichai and Zach and all others, they only translated poetry. There are a few pieces of her prose, which I think, if I remember rightly, it was Tuvia Rübner who published them in different, but there is no, and also in the edition of the Kösel Verlag, the first edition, before our critical edition, they were really stepchildren because they didn't put the illustrations into the book. They were only texts, as if the illustrations are not part of the text. So I have written about this also. So this is a very critical point. So I was happy. And I myself, as coming to Israel from Switzerland, I wasn't really fascinated by the exotics of this country. It was Zionism, and I at the time was Bnei Akiva in a family of third generation Mizrahi. So I could have done, I much more liked Mount Carmel and this lake, the sea down at the bottom, like the lakes in Switzerland and the mountains. I mean, my landscape is a very not exotic. My inner landscape is a very, very, if you want, romantic, banal, you know, what everybody likes. So I'm a simple Swiss soul. So, but I learned, I was fascinated by the approach of Liora, and also I'm always for interdisciplinary approaches, as my special interest also in my studies was the connection between literature and history, also philosophy, but history, and also the process of reception. You know, so this is my, so I want to, from this point of view and from some aspects of my, two aspects actually of my research on Lasker-Schüler, I would like to add some things, not to contradict Chas v'Chalila, but to add, the first edition is on the what you call the trope of dance in her work, starting with the first with a song, Mein Tanzlied, my dance song, in the first published book, Styx, in 1902. And I taught at a certain time at the Hebrew University a course which now is much more again in writing women of Jewish origin, especially of German-Jewish origins. I did a seminar on this several times, and I also once gave a lecture at some Kulturtage in Munich when there was a women in Judaism. I was talking about this topic, literature and emancipation, if you want, Jewish writing women or Jewish women of the pen, as there is a lexicon in the National Library Bibliographical Park on German writers, German women writers, Frauen der Feder, from some woman called Lucy Patatsky. And it was a very important source because she mentioned a lot of Jewish women writing, but not only writing poetry and literature or letters, but also writing cooking books, all kinds of writings, journalists. It's a wonderful, I don't know if it still exists, this book, but it was a very important source for me. So I gave this name, Frauen der Feder, the women of the pen. And the topic, the frame of my seminar was writing women between Glickel from Hameln over Rachel Levin-Varnhagen until Else Lasker-Schüler, Gertrud Kolmar, Margarete Sussman, and Hannah Arendt. And at a certain point of I was curious to read poems of all these women to find a common denominator. And what was, guess 3 times, what was the common denominator? Dance.
Interesting.
So I just want to give one example. I have 5 examples. The first one is of Rachel Varnhagen-Levin. She didn't write poems. She wrote letters and a diary. And there is an edition of her dreams, the dreams in her diaries by Barbara Hahn. And one of the dreams is, it's the second dream from 1812, the year of the Prussian Edict of Emancipation, if you want. And there she dreamt that she is in a big place with several rooms where there are artworks from all the centuries, from the earliest to the latest until the present. And there are people looking at these, and then suddenly, and there are people there, and a young man enters, and everybody says, he is the ideal. He is the ideal. And there is an atmosphere of Day of Judgment of what is art. What is art? And then Rachel, the dreamer, she goes up to this young man and she starts to dance with him. And she dances with him with the ideal, and she makes her step into connection with art through this man who is very concrete, very down to earth in this wonderful dream. I make it short because it's a long dream. I didn't have the time to translate it. So that's one piece. Yes, this dream.
How does it end?
What?
How does it end, the dream? She wakes up, but before that.
Ja, mit großem Vergnügen, ganz unbefangen, fröhlich, die Künstler sehen etwas erstaunt zu, treten etwas zurück. Und so auch mein Traum, denn hier war aus.
Okay,
so thank you. That's the end of the dream. So it was wonderful. Everybody was surprised, looking at me, looking at him. Something new happened. And something new really happened in the salons and the whole, it's aristocracy. A lot of you know the story of the Berlin salons and so on. The next song is Mein Tanzlied. I don't have to talk about it, Else Lasker-Schüler, but at the same time, being in Germany, remaining in Germany, Gertrud Kolmar, who remained there because she wanted to take care of her father, and then she was finally deported. She was in the story, and she sent her poems to her sister. And there is one poem by Gertrud Kolmar, which is called Ein sonderbarer Tanz, a strange dance. And it's a woman who is dancing with herself. And it's not clear if she imagines being pregnant or if she is pregnant, but she is dancing. I can't go into detail because I have another part of so I'll just suggest, read the poem, Der sonderbare Tanz. I don't know if there are English translations, Hebrew translations. I think there are none of Gertrud Kolmar. There is, yes, of poems. Yes. Of her poems, but not of her talk. Oh, okay, but it's very rare. And then I'm coming, one of the most interesting. I'm leaving, what's her name, Margarete Sussman to the end, although chronologically, I'm just jumping to Hannah Arendt. There is a poem which she wrote with the title Traum in the winter of 23-24. How could one get at all at those poems with the help of the publication of her correspondence with Martin Heidegger? And Martin in the late 90s, I think it was 98 when it appeared, and I read it, and they had an agreement, as the editors of the volume say, they had an agreement that both of them would destroy the letters of the other one. And you can again guess, he of course destroyed the letters of Arendt, but she didn't destroy the letters of Heidegger. So there had to be some equilibrium, so they put in from her diaries or other places, Denktagebücher or whatever, they put in, there is one piece about Heidegger, very critical, like a fox in a trap, but there are also poems. And one of the poems dated 1923-24 is like I'm dancing with a fullness which is schwebend.
Floating.
Floating, yes, floating. And then I just read, and I think a lot of you would, I just read the German. Ich selbst, auch ich tanze, ironisch vermessen, ich habe nichts vergessen. Ich kenne die Leere, ich kenne die Schwere, ich tanze in ironischem Glanze. That's wow. Dance with Arendt. And now I come to Margarete Sussman, who edited her volume of poems, Neue Gedichte, in 1907, the year of appearance of Tino. It's like entangled dance in light and in a realm of beauty, and almost eaten up from my own flame, and I'm above the blue glimmer of the abyss, and that's how it goes on. And it's like some kind of, it's something between her and herself, but a lot of yearning, a lot of, and I just read the last strophe. Umschwingung und Umschreitung ohne Ende, Musik, die Kranz an Kranz zum Kranze reiht. Ein Leben ohne Eckstein, ohne Wände und unablässig Heimkehr aus der Zeit. That's the wonderful line. And it's like when you read the poem, it's like the poem itself is also like a dance. It's also a kind, I can't read it because I don't have a translation. I couldn't produce a valuable translation in this short time into English. So I just wanted to open, and I think now there is going on some new thinking about writing women. And so I think it would be interesting to do it with non-Jewish writing women, German, French, English, whatever, but one has to be in a frame where it's what you call in German überschaubar. My second point is more intriguing, I think, because it challenges, in some way, it challenges Liora's interpretation of the name Apollides. Okay. Excuse my, but there was so much going on besides. I would suggest to her that it's like against the Apollonian fascination, and it's Apollides. He is lonely. He is an outsider in the polis. He's alone, and all this. It doesn't contradict. I think it adds a very interesting dialectics. And I would say that Apollides can be read for a Jewish ear like Maimonides, Nachmanides, or Maimonides, Nachmanides, the son of, or the offspring of, or the mutation of Apollo. And this mutation I can find in a poem by Heine, which is called Der Apollogot. And I think it's justified to do this because I also have done research about Else Lasker-Schüler's reception of Heinrich Heine. And Heinrich Heine was very important for her all around. The most interesting one and or one of the most is in her prose text, Ich räume auf. I'm making order with a pamphlet against her editors. And she doesn't do justice to the situation of Heine because he was in a better place. But she said he also died from hunger like me because of his. So there he mentions him and in very other. But the most interesting is her. I wrote there was a conference on Jewish reception of Heinrich Heine, and my part of this is it was published in 1992 in Beersheba, edited. The conference was initiative of Mark Gelber, and he also edited the volume. And the title of my article is Bacharach and Barcelona on Else Lasker-Schüler's relation to Heine, where I try to make the Wunderrabbiner von Barcelona and the Rabbi von Bacharach and the many connotations that there are, but there are also a lot, and that then in this context and in many others, which I don't mention here, there is this poem about the Apollogot. It has three, it's in the Romancero by Heine, in the first, which is was edited in 1954-5, and it has three parts. The first part shows a nun in a monastery who is in love, secretly in love with a false god, Apollo, yes, with Apollo. And I think he is playing there with a German folk song about the two children of kings who couldn't get together because the water was too deep. And there was a treacherous nun, and a nun who was envious. And she put out the light in the lighthouse, and they couldn't find it. It's like a Romeo and Julia song story in a folk song. So maybe he played, but she was really crazy about it. That's her. She is introduced, and then we see. I was looking for an English translation. I couldn't find one online. There are many, but they were not findable online. Ich bin der Gott, der Musiker verehrt in allen Landen. Mein Tempel hat in Graecia auf Montparnasse gestanden. And then it goes on through the centuries, and it's like, it's a degeneration. It's a picture of degeneration from the high Greek culture, from the Parnassos, through the cultures, and especially the religions, and the beliefs, the Christian religion, and they all took in or transformed the Greek culture, and the Jews too, and everybody. And I sang here and I sang there. And then in the third chapter, we see the nun who was she disguised herself in clothes not of her order, but of the order of Beginen. Beginen it was in Holland, especially in Holland, nuns who probably older ones who were doing philanthropy and social work. That was there. So she was a Begine, and she goes to the river and she wants to see where he goes and go after him. And then she meets on the way, a man singing, going along and singing, and he is singing Jewish tunes. It's like the eternal Jew or the wandering Jew singing, who has once been a cantor somewhere. And he goes through and he sings, and then she asks him, and she says, have you seen, he is in Holland, ob ich ihn gesehen habe? Ja, ich habe, she asked about Apollo. Ja, ich habe ihn gesehen. Oft genug zu Amsterdam in der deutschen Synagoge. Denn war Vorsänger dorten, und da hieß Rabbi Pheibisch, Phoebus Apollo, Phoebus Apollo, the god of the sun. And the name Pheibisch is created by Heine, that there is Pheibisch, a Yiddish name Pheibisch, that's a creation of Heine, Phoebus Apollo. And his father, Moses Itcher, I knew him well. He was a cutter of foreskins, ein Vorhautabschneider. You can see all the connotations, the ironic ones with and he also did circumcise sovereigns, all kinds in the royal families who were circumcised, and his mother, and in the end he ends in the gutter of Amsterdam. And I think that it's like it joins so beautifully. It's mutations. It's like it's degeneration, not becoming. It's maybe mutation, but it's a critique. And I just want to finish with a citation of a letter of Heine when he was about to be baptized, and he wrote to his friend Moser that he doesn't want at all to get the Christian. His parents want him to have a profession where he can earn money. And he said, why should I convert to a bankrupt religion like Christianity? It has deteriorated. It isn't what it was at once. So What's the big deal? I don't want to. And as we know, after he was baptized, the more he was occupied with his Jewish sources and his Jewish identity. So far.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Rita. Thank you. I just want to add to the possibility of associating Apollonius with degeneration. In my reading of the Knights of Tino, I'm pointing out that there is a pattern that runs through the whole book, that there is the powerful patriarch, violent, cruel, there is the young man, and there is Tino. And this triangle comes up all the time. And the young man could and should be the one who throws over the powerful patriarch, but he's too weak, he's degenerate. And Apollonius is one of them. So all her lovers, they're too weak. Hassan in Philippopel forgets her, and they're too weak. And she imagines herself, and that's how she becomes a poetess, by imagining that she's going to replace. So the fathers have the Methusalems, there is one in, have to be, thrown over, and the young guys are just not good enough. And so she's going to take over. And that's basically the pattern of the night. So Apollonius, being a degenerate son of version of Apollo, but at the same time, they are also, so the young ones, they were also, they were expelled from, so the Apollonius interpretation of the Apolis, they were also excluded from the establishment. But out there as artists, they were just not good enough. And that's interesting that in the years 19 to 1910, there are many works in literature showing weak rebels. So, for example, in Hermann Hesse, Unterm Rat, there are all these youngsters who want to rebel against the powerful father and who don't make it. And so this is the female voice. I mean, Kafka, of course, in the Judgment. Wanting to rebel against the father and wanting to carry him to the bed, and there he jumps up. And this is the period when, when Kafka imagines at the end of the Metamorphosis that his sister is going to dance on his grave, on Gregor's grave. That's the last image, and it's dance. That she's going to dance. Sie streckte ihren jungen Körper on his grave. So, and what's fascinating in both your stories is, I mean, there is a certain power in her writing that comes out. So it's not the cutesy dance.
Not at all.
Certainly not. Would you like to just come a moment here, Ita Bleib, for questions?
Okay.
Yes. And then we're going to have a drink and even a bite.
We sit you in the middle.
Yes.
That's how it should be.
So I would like to open the floor for questions, and I can open it maybe with a question myself. I have a question to Liora. You speak about her gender fluidity, and at the same time, it's very clear to throw over patriarchy, even what I said now. So how do these two things go together? Because that means that you do maintain a certain and even quite stereotypical idea. If you have the powerful father and you have, the weak son, but who should be his successor. And even about women, you said at a certain point, écriture féminine being, écriture féminine, women's writing, écriture corporelle, but these were, especially in the 80s and 90s, they were they were accused of having all kinds of stereotypes, of carrying, you know, it's irrational écriture and it's ecstatic. And so how do these two things go together? On the one hand, maintaining the categories and at the same time thinking in terms of the fluid, which you have wonderfully presented, you know, all the way to God himself, him or herself, see?
I don't know what to answer. I don't know what to answer. Actually, at the end of her life, when she wrote I and I, yes, there were these two eyes in her.
Okay.
Yes, and they somehow were either in a conflict or in a cooperation, but there were these two eyes. Definitely, her love poems are very feminine. I mean, they're not.
Very interesting.
Maybe
yes.
I think she's even more modern because she says that there is no democracy or liberation or something which just has once been created. It has always to be taken care of, and there are conflicts over this. I think the situation we are in today with democracies and conflicts and the government we have here, it's exactly the balance between interests. I mean, there is something even more dynamic in her that I don't think she has been thinking about Ende gut, alles gut, when all
definitely not,
and that things go on, and if you have planted something, you have to take care of it so that it wouldn't be destroyed, or if you have created something, and that's the critique of in politics. I think that's a critical mind. She was a critical mind, not less. I think that also there is a doctorate on her critical intelligence or something, like a very, very good one, how takes her down from the, you know, Weltfremd and all these. Yeah.
I think also in her dance metaphors, or the way she uses the dance trope, it is mostly not in the way dance is mentioned by previously by Jewish writers, Jewish women writers, as it occurred to me, it almost always comes in a dream. Yes, it is a dream of something beautiful and harmonious. But for Else Lasker-Schüler, dance is a lament. It is not such a happy thing at all.
Very interesting.
Although every now and then, yes, it comes in a different connotation, but mostly it is a lament.
Guy, I wanted to ask you, you're the next generation of Lasker-Schüler readers, and you are particularly concerned in your work with an unusual topic of anesthesia. I was wondering if, because this would really like open up completely new venues. I mean, there's something so moving, becoming mobile in Lasker-Schüler. I was wondering if you have found.
Yes, I think there's something in this text, and especially in these fragments on Tino and Apollodus.
Yeah, I must apologize for not including the part on Apollodus that Guy responded to in my lecture. But,
but I think it was.
So this gives you an opportunity to bring
to explain about it.
There's something about these texts that are not anesthetic; they are omniaesthetic. Like there's a sort of an omnisensitive mind that is like getting these molecular information and moving, in which like electricity moves throughout this body. And I think that like it does connect in a certain moment to what I'm concerned with intellectually, which is how anesthesia and how non-consciousness and non-perception can produce beauty in a sort of Kleisian sense. And it connects, like Kleist says, like this is the other side of coming again to heaven in his in his
like on the
in his Marionettentheater, he writes that they are like the option.
This is where the two ends meet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, and you can
enter paradise from the back door.
From the back door, which also holds some erotic intention, right? You can, you come from the back door. So I think that these like minds that the omnisensitive and the non-sensitive somehow can be reconciled within these with these steps.
Interesting. Great, thank you. Are there questions, remarks? There was such a diversity of viewpoints and topics, and wonderful these dance poems by women. I know that Benjamin and we once talked about the possibility of reviving a project concerning women, Jewish women writers, because it was dormant for and this was. But I also noticed that they are all happening in dreams, and especially the Arendt one was really yes. Imagining Arendt and Heidegger dance was somehow difficult. Anyway, if there are no questions, we can just proceed to and thank you so much.